I shouldn't have assumed that the original character was straight. Perhaps she was bisexual. It's so interesting that that's what I automatically go toward. I'm of an age where coming out was so important. Like it was like a big part of our freedom and about marriage equality. And when I was watching it again, when I watched it the first time, and Mike talks about his girlfriend, I was like, oh, this is a straight guy sleeping with this guy because he's a sex worker. And when I watched it last weekend, I'm like, that's so interesting that that was my go-to. And it was even again talking about the original idea. Like, I love the fact that he doesn't say what his sexuality is in this short, if I remember correctly. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, was that a discussion then? And moving into this idea of taking the character forward, is it going to be something that's part of the continuing story?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm bisexual. I've always been bisexual. I've had long relationships with dudes. I'm now married to Addie, to a woman, for 24 years. My God. So, so and it's interesting, people's response to bisexuality is very
Right.
interesting. Like, I literally had a meeting last week with a wonderful film producer who was like, I just want to start by saying I don't believe in bisexuality. So the
Oh,
whole meeting
geez,
started that way.
Louise.
And I
Oh,
was
that's
like,
still a thing.
well, then you kind of are you kind of don't believe in me because that's who I am.
Oh,
You know,
God,
but for a
I
long
do
time,
keep
like I
thinking that.
didn't want to like I commented sometimes on it when it was, I never was closeted about it, but I never wanted to politicize it in a way. Like I was kind of like, oh, that's just me, that's who I am. And but I feel like with everything going on in the world right now, like in the last few years, I've really started kind of going like making a point of being like I'm LGBTQ plus. Like it's really important to I think when you said it was important to come out of the closet then. I think it's really important to come out of the closet now and just kind of very boldly and proudly state who you are because of what's going on in this country. And so like I really made a very active choice about 3 or 4 years ago, talking with Addie and stuff of going like, look, it's important to me to kind of state that I am that, you know what I mean? And so that was, so that was one part of it. But like, I don't know. I don't know what Will's character is, like what I do know is that he makes love with him that night. It's not just paid sex, you know what I mean? And I think sexuality is so beautiful and fluid and unique. And I think you never know who you're going to turn the corner and run into someone who you're like, my God, I could make love with that person. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that's always been my existence of it, and kind of my experience of it, being bisexual. Like I'm constantly surprised who I'm attracted to. I'm like, oh shit. And I love, and the surprise is kind of wonderful in a way. Um, and so like I know that the one thing that was important to me is that they make love, that it's not just paid sex. And so like that was really, really important to me, whether he's never been with a guy before, whether he has been with a guy before, of his own choice
Sure.
outside of kind of the payment thing. I know that they make love that night and that something special happens between them and that it changes someone's life. And so that was important to me.
And to second Daniel, I think it is interesting, isn't it, that when we shot this in 2019, I mean, in some ways the culture is very different now, in some ways
Yeah.
it's not, but I think one of the things that I always talked about with Will is that Mike sees himself probably as straight. He got into this for economic reasons, but completely separate from that, his character has to feel a very sincere connection with Chris's, to the point where maybe even he's a little caught off guard at some point over the course of the evening by how much he does emotionally attach, and that the way that this innocence and purity between them is there, that it allows him to talk about things that he certainly would never talk about with a client, but probably would not even talk about with some of his closest friends. And because I always just come back to the line that sticks with me so much, and I think it's one of the most powerful lines or exchanges in it, is when they're in the hot tub after he's talked about the girlfriend, and he says thanks, and Chris is like, for what? And he goes, for not asking.
Right.
That it's that there is something very special there. And I think it directly informs a moment that I find so compelling at the end that Daniel constructed, where, like, yes, the money is still exchanged. It is still ultimately the transaction is honored on that base level. But I think kind of the most powerful gift that Mike gives him, aside from one, taking the gun and removing that from the premises, but refusing to take him on as a regular client, because I think that that is him saying, setting a boundary both for himself and for Chris's character of, no, you might have needed this tonight. You don't need this constantly. You need to go out there. You need to do this. Like, I can take care of the past 12 hours, but you've got to take care of the next forever. And I think that that's as much for him as for Chris, because I think he's could even be a little scared about like how emotionally he opened up there, but also knowing that he can't fully take on what Chris's character needs, like in order to get better. Like that cannot become his job.